Did you know that the one we knew as Rusev in WWE has requested to be released from his contract with All Elite Wrestling? This is not just any piece of information. He could potentially return to the Stamford Federation. In any case, that's what I hope with all my heart personally. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why. Get comfortable, grab a coffee, and let's discuss all of this together.
You are on the Wrestling Paradise.
And why I think Rusev should return to WWE. Let's go.
WrestleMania får ett stor chans.
So before anything else, let me explain a bit about what happened with Rusev, or rather the one we know as Miro, in All Elite Wrestling. It should be noted that he was in the competing federation of WWE, but just recently he requested to be released from his contract. In general, we know well that when such things happen in wrestling, it is clearly a signal that the wrestler wants to leave. Perhaps also because they are fed up with the promotion they are in, which will soon, normally, be available to other promotions. So right away, we imagine Rusev, formerly Miro in WWE, potentially returning. And personally, that's all I wish for. I must admit that I find that All Elite Wrestling, well, there are qualities to All Elite Wrestling. I'm not, let's say, the biggest fan, but there have been a lot of good storylines in recent years. And there have also been excellent wrestlers over there. But I don't know if for Nero, rather Rusev, I will call him that now, it was the ideal place, if it was the right place for him. Because it's true that he is clearly one of these characters, at least when he is truly at his best version, which we will return to later. What is for me his best version. But in any case, when he is really at his best, he is a larger-than-life character. He is capable of being that. And it's true that this isn't really the kind of profile, let's be honest, that you find the most in
All Elite Wrestling,
which is more of a ground for many more technical, let's say more acrobatic wrestlers, even if there has still been some success. But still, the fact is that he is going to leave normally, and hopefully WWE has the good idea to sign him. And why do I want WWE to sign him? So, even though I have to admit that I still have some concerns, because I wonder, does Triple H, who likes, let's say, the indie phenomena, who appreciates profiles like Johnny Gargano, etc., which also appeals to a large part of the fans, it must be recognized, does he would be interested in a profile like Rusev's? First of all, we can still acknowledge one thing about Rusev. He was in NXT, and he proved himself in a place where Triple H oversaw everything. And at that time, he was indeed highlighted. So that means Triple H normally likes Rusev, unless Triple H has completely changed, which is possible. The fact is that, for me, the main reason he should return and WWE should recruit him is that he has incredible potential. I must confess, I was a fan back then when he was... So you should know that first he was Alexander Rusev, and then they shortened it to Rusev. He has become a heel character. So, can we call him a monster heel? Maybe not really. If he had been bigger, bulkier, and more massive, then yes. But still, we used him, in a way as if he were a monster. In a certain way, he was basically a big Russian villain. It was a bit cliché, but sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's entertaining, that kind of cliché. A mean Russian guy, straight out of the Cold War, who also reminded me a bit of Vladimir Kozlov, in a way. One could say that Rusev was somewhat the heir to Kozlov in a way. However, despite their different physiques, Rusev has a much wilder side, because it's true that when we see him today, he might be a bit less on our minds. But remember that at the time, when he was really in his prime in WWE, I'm thinking particularly around 2015, when he had a rivalry against none other than John Cena. After all, it was Rusev who faced John Cena at WrestleMania 31. That's no small feat. And who was also the United States champion at one point. Basically, his preferred look, I would say, was when he had long hair, a beard, and he was also... By the way, I find it funny to think that he was actually barefoot in the ring, which really added a wild aspect, and it reminded me a bit of Umaga, by the way. This way of walking. There are very few wrestlers who do it, walking like that. Without boots, let's say, it immediately gives an animalistic quality, and he had that animal side. And I must still acknowledge that he really has a very strong identity. He had a very strong identity back then. let's not forget that he also had a significant argument, I want to say, by his side. He still had a manager, Lana. And still, it looked impressive, I have to say. Can you even imagine that we had some kind of wild beast with, well, the feet red, who was ready to destroy everyone, to crush everyone, as he said, with a manager by his side, a blonde with an accent. Well, she really played up the accent, rolling her words, and it was great, At least there was a real identity. We can like or dislike Rusev. It may be our cup of tea or not, but we cannot. It took away from him that he had a very strong identity. This is something that many characters in general lack in WWE. Finally, there are often characters whose traits are not very clear. For him, it was straightforward. He was the big Russian villain, a wild beast. And then, what's funny is that in reality, he is Bulgarian, but he still played a Russian. And for me, just for that, well, after all, do they have the courage in WWE, especially in the current global context, to have him play a Russian villain again? I doubt it a bit. But on the other hand, we don't have to make him play a Russian. We can also have him portray a wild beast nonetheless, and a larger-than-life destroyer, and maybe give him an identity still from Eastern Europe. We could just make him Bulgarian. That would be the most natural for him. It's true that maybe a Russian villain isn't quite the context. But still, I think that if we try to use the strengths of the identity he had at the time, there is something good to do with him, because he knew how to tell a story. A real character, indeed, makes everything easier. When you have a real character, you can easily imagine scenarios. So it's true that for him, the opponent is crucial, and I'm glad it happened in hindsight. It was ideal for John Cena. John Cena, who embodies the character of an American superhero and American soldier, had a perfect opponent in Rusev. And maybe today, we don't really have characters like that. American superheroes, except could we perhaps consider Cody Rhodes as, well, in a very different register from John Cena, of course, without the military aspect either. But let's not forget that Cody Rhodes is the American nightmare, and that his outfits, his identity, there's a lot of America in there. And he is still the son of the American dream, so we can say that he is somewhat a symbol of America. Wouldn't he be a fitting opponent for Rusev? If Rusev had an Eastern European island, wild side, why not? In any case, I think he could tell a story with Cody Rhodes. And that is also one of Rusev's great strengths, which is one of the other arguments for why WWE should bring him back. He has a past with certain wrestlers. After all, not just anyone has that. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is John Cena. So it's true that John Cena is closer to the end now, but why not have in 2025, in tribute to the good old days, I want to say, especially since it will be exactly 10 years. It's crazy. In 2025, it will be 10 years since he had that rivalry against Rusev. So why not pay tribute to that and have a Silla Rusev match in 2025? What would be funny? What would be funny? Especially since Rusev could say, well, this would also fit more with this current craze, which has its good sides, but also its bad sides of being really on the very realistic side of openly talking about the behind the scenes of wrestling. For example, Rusev could say to John Cena, if we were to go in that direction, at the time, I had so much potential. I was coming back. Well, I was coming straight from NXT. I was promised a great future, but you completely buried me, and my career never really recovered. What we can see things a bit this way. After that, it's too easy to place the blame solely on John Cena, of course, but purely within the storyline, it could be a bit of the backdrop to their story. He also has a history with Roman Reigns, after all. Maybe it's not the most memorable rivalry for Roman Reigns, nor for Rusev either. But I still remind you that at the time when there was a huge breath of fresh air in the summer of 2016, which lasted for months and was amazing, I mentioned it more than once on the channel, especially for those who saw my video on WrestleMania 33, where it was a bit of my love letter to that beautiful era from the summer of 2016 until WrestleMania 33, which was a true period of renewal for WWE. And I remind you that at the very beginning of this period, it should be noted that Roman Reigns was put on the back burner because, unfortunately, due to the booking we were doing with him, he had annoyed everyone. And above all, he also had a suspension. Finally, he had some issues, Roman, unfortunately, and so he was given a rivalry for the United States title against Rusev in the summer of 2016. And I particularly remember a scene where Lana ends up really covered in cake. Poor Lana. And believe it or not, there is a past. Well, it's not very, very dense and not very, very, very exciting, this past. But there is one. And I still think that despite everything, Rusev could represent that kind of threatening opponent. Provided, of course, that he is used well. He can really be a credible and interesting opponent for Roman. In any case, for me, Cena and Roman are the first two that come to mind, in terms of the past, with whom he could tell a story again. But, that being said, he still potentially has chemistry, as I said, with Cody Rhodes. I really think it would depend a lot on the identity of his character, that's for sure. But maybe also, who knows, he could come to enrich Monday Night Raw a bit, which, in any case, I find is a bit weak in the current top roster, lacking strong dominant characters. So it's true that he shouldn't come to Raw and overshadow Bronson Reed, for example, who would be on the rise. But maybe the two can coexist at the same time. Or could he rather go to SmackDown and have rivalries against the major babyfaces over there? I'm thinking, for example, of an LA night. Why not create a feud somewhat like that in the mid-card? I should say, with LA Knight, who could be facing his first major threat. A guy who could physically put him in check, which could also elevate him. Why not? Then why not also Randy Orton while we're at it? And Roman, Cena, and Cody? I would say they are the most obvious ones at first glance. And I also want to emphasize that Rusev is not only about his physique, he also has a wild side. And I hope, despite everything, that this could play into his potential success in WWE. At least for me, as a fan, I think he has every interest in returning with the same look as before and having Lana with him again, because it's true that this duo was great. But be careful not to create a disastrous storyline, because obviously, when we think of Rusev, we can have several things in mind, including the image of a violent brute, who was a crowd favorite at the beginning. Until John Cena came along, I want to say, can we think of Rusev Day, which was really very popular among the fans. We may tend to forget, but it was really popular. Fans loved it. He was with a guy named Aiden, English, and it was great. In any case, he had found a real idea, a concept, at least the Rusev Day, which was cool and entertaining. However, we can unfortunately also remember his storyline. Oh wow, what a storyline with Bobby Lashley and Lana indeed. When Lana was in a relationship with Bobby Lashley, with Rusev being the cuckold, the butt of the joke, I want to say, who was really at the center of Monday Night Raw, let's say between the fall, the end of 2019, and the beginning of 2020, which literally led to nothing. What's funny, by the way, is that Paul Heyman, who was in charge of Monday Night Raw at the time, the executive director, or at least the one in charge of creativity, let's say over there, the creative head, had really promised, apparently, to Rusev that this whole story would lead to one of the main events. So, we already know very well that there aren't multiple main events at WrestleMania. There is only one. But he had said that there would be one of the main events for you, Rusev, basically summarizing that due to these storylines, he had actually been fired shortly after, and that it had literally led to nothing, unfortunately for Rusev. And it's true that this was perhaps the biggest blemish on Rusev's career. But again, if he's used well, there are really great things that can be done. I also think, maybe, why not, about a rivalry with Guma King Tyre. For him, it's simple. With Rusev, I think there are two options. Either you create a rivalry, where he faces another guy, somewhat in his profile, who is stocky, massive, and physically strong, also in the larger-than-life aspect, and we create a clash of titans, and we make him, obviously, no matter what happens. First of all, a really important threat. I think an essential step, especially with guys who are just starting out. He should first have a long series of victories, so either we do that, and we have him face a guy just as strong so that he can basically try to conquer him. Why not? That could be pretty good. Or then he is challenged by someone who might be more like Cody Rhodes, or perhaps a bit like Seth Rollins, or someone who is, in any case, less physically imposing than him and who truly represents a major challenge for his opponent. For example, I don't know if there will be an opportunity, but with Cody Rhodes, not only could he represent a threat and perhaps be one of the biggest dangers during Cody Rhodes' reign, but it would also be very interesting. So, it's certain that we would really be in absolute realism. And I don't know if WWE would agree to do it, even though there have already been references of this kind in recent years as well. Why not Rusev? Miro, in this case, who would say, "Yeah, I was at the company you helped create. I was unhappy there. It was a failure. You lied to me." Basically, there would really be a story to tell, honestly. Yeah. So, we'll see how we could make use of him. And I would like to tell a rather funny anecdote about Rusev that I saw recently. Well, I don't know if you knew this, but if you're a soccer fan, Rusev is a big fan of Real Madrid. And something I would like to commend about him is that he has this mentality of seeking to attract it at all costs, as they say. So, what is it? It's when you play a villain, doing everything to make the fans hate you as much as possible and generating a lot of reactions that you are supposed to have, especially hate, anger, and wanting to see you get beaten. That is the goal of it all, normally. And why I say he still has that old school mentality, but old school in the totally good sense, is that basically, yes, I am a fan, and I need to hit back. As a fan of Real Madrid, we come back to it. He had been at a show in Barcelona at the time, and he still dared to sing for Madrid in front of Barcelonians, which is still a brilliant act. And it's not a very well-known anecdote about Rusev, but it is still worth its weight in peanuts because I think it illustrates well that he understands wrestling completely, in my opinion. In any case, when you're a heel, the goal isn't to perform amazing moves. At least in his case, it's not necessarily about being spectacular, blah blah blah. No. His goal is for people to hate him. It's for people to, just like many others say, I also think about MJF as well as All Elite Wrestling, which has already said that heels like that, and even The Miz in WWE, have openly said that they enjoy being hated and that they seek to be hated at all costs when they are heels. Rusev also has this mentality, and I commend it. In any case, all this is to say that for all these reasons, I think there is something good to be done with Rusev/Miro today in WWE, which can fill gaps, particularly on Monday Night Raw in the roster, for all the intimidating physicality, larger than life, because if we take stock, it's true that we have Bronson Reed, Gunther, as guys who are still heavyweights, and still Bronson Reed, so big crush on him, but he is not very tall. Gunther, yes, Gunther is perhaps getting a bit closer, but it's true that there are significant shortcomings in that area, and Rusev could be really useful. So for all these reasons, I think he could enrich the roster, and that there are stories to tell. A little, let's say, preference on my side anyway for something with Cody Rhodes around All Elite Wrestling in America versus him, well, maybe not Russia, but Eastern Europe. Come on. Why not also tell a story with John Cena, have at least one match or a short rivalry in 2025 as a tribute to 2015, mainly as a tribute and a wink, especially. Anyway, there are things to do with Rusev. I just wanted to say that I really like this Rusev. I really like him. Let's hope that WWE and Triple H have the good idea to recruit him. In any case, that's all I wish for.
We can say that this topic raises a lot of questions. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay in the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?